Hey everyone, excited to jump into a topic that I think will resonate with a lot of you today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into this idea of how to experience more of God's
Oh,
presence.
yeah, this is gonna be good.
I was really intrigued by this video I saw recently by Melody Alisa. She's a faith-based content creator on YouTube, puts out new videos every Monday.
Okay.
And her approach really stood out to me because she frames this whole journey of experiencing more of God as something that actually has a cost.
Hmm.
Things we might need to let go of, to really make space for that deeper connection.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Counting the cost is something we do with any major life decision, right?
Yeah.
When you choose one path, you're saying no to others. Melody just brings that same principle into the spiritual realm.
Right, exactly. It's like being intentional about clearing space, even if it means letting go of things that are good in themselves to make room for something even greater. So I'm really curious to explore what some of those costs might be and how they might resonate with us. Where do you think we should start?
Well, Melody starts by tackling a misconception that's pretty common in a lot of faith traditions. It's the idea that being busy doing things for God is the same as actually spending time with Him.
Yeah, that's such a subtle but important distinction, isn't it? It's like we can get so caught up in checking things off our spiritual to-do list, serving, volunteering, even just consuming a ton of content.
Yeah.
All good things, but we can miss that opportunity to just be present with God.
It is easy to fall into that Martha mode, for sure.
Mhm.
Always striving, doing, serving.
Totally. It reminds me of that story of Mary and Martha in the Gospel of Luke.
Right.
Martha's running around, serving Jesus and the disciples, making sure everything's perfect. And Mary, she just sits at Jesus's feet, soaking up his teaching.
And Jesus commends her for it.
I know. He emphasizes how important that time with him is, just being present.
Yeah. And, that story is so relevant today. Think about it. How many of us are living like modern-day Marthas?
Hmm. It's a good question. What are some of those Martha tendencies we might see today? Things that maybe are crowding out that space for a deeper connection with God.
I think it often comes down to how we see ourselves. We get so invested in our roles in our church, our small group, always leading, serving, giving advice.
Oh, yeah.
But we lose sight of the main point, that relationship with God. It becomes more about what we're doing, how useful we are, than about simply being in communion with Him.
It's almost like we're trying to earn God's favor through all that busyness instead of remembering that his love is freely given.
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who's like, yep, that's me, I'm a total Martha,
But
what would be a good first step towards shifting that focus?
honestly, I'd say start by getting really honest with yourself. Ask yourself why you do the things you do. Is it out of genuine love, or is there some sense of obligation there? Maybe even a fear of what might happen if you step back a bit.
Oh, that's a good point.
Once you see those deeper motivations, it's easier to create space for a more genuine, less performance-based way of living out your faith.
So it's about peeling back those layers and getting real with yourself. What are some red flags that might indicate, hey, I'm maybe leaning a little too hard on the doing for God side of things?
I think one big one is that feeling of emptiness,
Yeah.
or even just exhaustion.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing all the right things, all the spiritual things,
Oh, yeah.
if your heart's not really in it, you're not going to find that joy and peace. That's a pretty good sign. You need to step back and prioritize some time with God. Just being.
Right. Being, not doing.
Exactly.
That's so insightful. Our spiritual lives should be life-giving, not draining us.
That's it.
So everyone listening, I want you to take a moment and just sit with this question. What are some things you might be doing for God that could actually be keeping you from really connecting with Him?
That's a good one to chew on for a while. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is just stop striving and just be.
Absolutely. Now, Melody doesn't stop there. Her next point dives into something that can be a little, uncomfortable to talk about, but it's so important, our attachment to material things.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is where it gets interesting. Melody doesn't say having nice things is wrong. It's all about your relationship with those things. What she really focuses on is the love of those things,
yeah.
the degree to which they're taking up space in your heart and mind.
That makes me think of the rich young ruler in the Gospel of Mark. He was a good guy, devout, doing all the right things, outwardly at least. But when Jesus told him to sell everything and follow him, he just couldn't do it.
It's such a powerful story, and it's so relevant today. It shows how our attachment to stuff, to comfort and security, can actually become a barrier to fully embracing what God's calling us to.
Yeah, and what I find so fascinating is the rich young ruler's reaction. He goes away sad.
Oh, yeah.
Not angry, not defiant, but genuinely grieved. Almost like he knew deep down that his wealth was holding him back from something truly meaningful, but he just couldn't break free.
It's almost like he's mourning what he's losing
Yeah.
or what he's missing out on.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think we all have that experience sometimes, right? Wanting something so badly, thinking it'll bring happiness, and then it just doesn't.
Yeah. We think we need that new phone, that bigger house, that perfect vacation. And then we get it and the feeling's gone. It's empty.
And Melody's point is that the same thing can happen with our relationship to material things. We chase after them, we think they'll bring security and satisfaction, but they can end up becoming idols, distracting us from what truly fulfills us, which is God.
It's a question of what you're putting your hope in, ultimately, where your security lies.
She talks about how our spending habits reveal a lot about where our true values lie, which is a little convicting when you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
So where do you tend to spend your time and money? What does that say about your priorities? And I'm asking myself that too, by the way.
Good question for all of us. Take a look at your budget, your calendar, even your social media feeds. They'll tell you a lot about what you truly value. And if that doesn't line up with your desire for more of God, well, maybe it's time for some adjustments.
Right, right. And I think that's a good place to pause and just let that sink in. But Melody doesn't stop there, so stay tuned for part 2, where we'll be digging into her final point, this idea of decreasing ourselves to make room for God to increase in our lives.
I love this one. It's all about surrender.
Yeah.
Can't wait to unpack it.
I love that idea of decreasing ourselves. It's definitely a little counterintuitive, in a culture that's all about self-promotion and achievement.
Oh, yeah. It definitely goes against the grain.
Uh-huh.
But Melody's point is that it's in that emptying, that letting go, that we actually make room for God to fill us up.
Right. And I think she also makes a really good point about getting specific about what we want to experience. It's easy to just say, oh, I want more of God, but what does that actually look like?
Totally. It's like, instead of this vague longing for more of God in general, what specific aspect of his presence are you most drawn to? His peace, his guidance, his comfort.
Yeah, it's like focusing a lens, right? Instead of trying to grasp the entirety of God, which is impossible, we choose one facet to really focus on and invite in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's much more tangible that way. And it helps us figure out what might be blocking that specific experience.
Okay, so that leads back to those costs we were talking about. Is it busyness, materialism, a lack of surrender?
It could be any of those things or a combination. It's different for everyone. But the key is to honestly assess your life. See where you might be holding back, clinging to those grains of sand a little too tightly.
So how do we even begin to identify those areas?
Well, I think a good starting point is just paying attention to what's going on inside. Like, what are the thoughts and emotions that keep popping up for you? Are there any areas where you feel resistant to surrendering to God? Or even just scared?
Interesting.
Often those uncomfortable spots are the ones that need the most attention.
It's not always about looking for these big, obvious signs, but really tuning in to those quieter whispers in our hearts, really.
Absolutely. And remember, this whole surrender thing, it's a journey, not a destination. You're going to have good days and bad days. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's normal.
That's good to hear. Sometimes it feels like we have to get it right all the time.
Nah, grace is a beautiful thing. Just keep coming back to that place of surrender.
Yeah, just keep showing up.
And even the smallest steps, they can make a difference. Melody talks about how those little acts of surrender, they have a ripple effect. They open up space for God to move in ways you wouldn't believe.
I love that. It's not about these huge dramatic gestures, but the small everyday choices to prioritize presence.
Exactly.
It makes me think about, maybe it's spending 5 minutes in silence each morning, or creating a little prayer corner in your home, or even letting go of that one possession you realize you've gotten a little too attached to.
All great examples. It's about being intentional, creating those little pockets of space for God.
Right, right. And I think that leads into her next point, which is about trusting that God knows what's best for us, even when we don't. That takes a lot of faith, right?
Yeah.
To surrender our plans, our desires, our understanding of how things should be.
Oh, absolutely. But there's so much freedom in that surrender. It's like you're finally letting go of the oars and letting God steer the boat.
Yeah. You might not know exactly where you're going, but you can trust that He's taking you somewhere good.
And that's what faith is all about, isn't it?
Right.
Trusting God even when it doesn't make sense. Believing He's working things out for our good, even when we can't see it.
That's really encouraging. And it makes me think of all those stories in the Bible, Abraham leaving his homeland, Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt.
Right?
Those journeys weren't easy, but they led to some incredible breakthroughs and ultimately a deeper experience of God's presence.
Exactly. It's about stepping into the unknown and trusting God to guide you.
And Melody actually offers a really cool resource for anyone who's feeling a little overwhelmed by this whole idea of surrender. She's put together this playlist on YouTube specifically for cultivating a more receptive heart posture toward God.
I love that. Music can be so powerful. It helps us connect with our emotions,
Mhm.
quiet our minds, and just create that space to be open to God.
Totally. It's like creating a soundtrack for your spiritual journey.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a good reminder that surrender isn't just about changing your mind. It's about engaging your whole being, your heart, your imagination, even your body.
So if we're thinking about all these costs, letting go of busyness, loosening our grip on possessions, decreasing ourselves, it seems like they all lead to the same place, a deeper, more authentic relationship with God.
That's it. It's not about deprivation. It's about creating space for something much, much greater.
I love that. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave everyone with a question Melody poses in her video. What aspect of God's presence would you most like to experience? And to take that a step further, what's one tangible thing you can do this week to create more space for that experience?
It doesn't have to be a big thing, just one small step in the right direction.
Like maybe those 5 minutes of silence, or finally decluttering that corner to make a prayer space.
Exactly. Those little steps, they can lead to big changes.
It's been such a rich conversation. Melody's approach is both challenging and inspiring, and I think her emphasis on counting the cost adds a level of intentionality that can be so helpful.
I agree. It's not about earning God's favor, but aligning your life with His will.
So for everyone listening, I encourage you to really lean into this process of reflection and surrender. What's God inviting you to let go of? What can you do today, even if it's a small thing, to make more space for His presence in your life? We'll pick up right here in part 3.
It's funny, huh? Even just talking about making space for God, it already feels like something's shifting inside.
I think just acknowledging that desire for a deeper connection, it kind of opens us up, makes us more receptive. Exactly. And I think Melody's point about God knowing what we need even better than we do, that's where the trust comes in, right? Surrendering our plans, our desires, even our ideas about what's best. It's like saying, okay, God, I'm open to what you have for me.
It's a tough thing to do, but man, there's so much freedom on the other side of that surrender.
It's like we're finally letting go of the oars and letting God steer the boat. We might not always know where we're going, but we can trust He's taking us to a good place.
And that ties back into that decreasing ourselves idea, right? When we let go of our ego's grip on how we think things should be, that's when things really start to open up.
It's like we're creating space for God to bless us in ways we never even imagined.
Exactly.
And this whole conversation has really got me thinking about the importance of silence and solitude in our relationship with God. It's like creating a sanctuary inside ourselves, a place where we can shut out all the noise of the world and just listen. It's so important, especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with information. Social media, news, entertainment. Creating that space for silence and solitude is more crucial than ever.
It's in those quiet moments when we're not distracted by all the external stuff that we can really hear those whispers of God, His guidance, His comfort, that still small voice speaking to our hearts.
Right, right.
And sometimes those whispers might lead us to make some big changes. Maybe it's a career change or a move or letting go of a relationship that's no longer healthy.
Surrender isn't always easy. It can be scary to let go of what's comfortable and familiar, to step into the unknown.
Yeah.
But it's in those moments of obedience, trusting God even when you don't fully understand. That's where you really experience His power.
It's like those moments become doorways to a deeper level of intimacy with God. We walk through them not knowing exactly what's on the other side, but trusting that He's there. And there's a real sense of adventure in that. It's not about following a bunch of rules or trying to achieve some perfect outcome. It's about letting God lead you on a journey of transformation.
It reminds me of that quote by C.S. Lewis. I pray because I can't help myself. I pray because I'm helpless. I pray because the need flows out of me all the time, waking and sleeping. It doesn't change God, it changes me.
Man, that is so good. It really captures the essence of surrender, right? It's not about manipulating God or trying to get Him to do what we want, but about letting His love transform us from the inside out.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into experiencing more of God's presence, I just want to encourage everyone listening to embrace that invitation to surrender. It's a journey, an ongoing process of letting go and letting God lead us deeper into His love. What's one step you can take today, even a small one, to create more space for him in your life.
Maybe it's starting a gratitude journal, or spending a few minutes in nature, or reaching out to someone you need to forgive. Whatever it is, just take that step.
Remember, those small acts of surrender can lead to incredible breakthroughs. So trust in God's goodness and let him lead you on this amazing adventure of faith.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep surrendering, and keep making space for the one who loves you most.